Hi, I'm Jim Rhino, your host for this edition of Rhino's Road Trip. Instead of taking off to some other part of the United States, the Midwest, or even my own home state of Illinois, we're going to do something just a little bit different. And I'm not going anywhere. We're going to stay right here in my own home and take care of your questions about techniques and prepping and cooking of various barbecue meats, competition style, kind of a 101 class, but designed for you. So we're going to do a three-part series here, based in Salem, staying right at home, where we will tackle competition barbecue ribs. Instead of doing baby back ribs, I've had more requests on how to cook spare ribs, so that's what we'll tackle. So check out all three video series, check out the rest of the series in Rhino's Road Trips, and if you have any questions at all about the techniques I'm using, or maybe you have a better technique that you want to suggest to me, you can write to me at rhino@banditbbq.com. Just check out that address right here at the bottom of the screen, and we'll make sure and answer your questions the best we can. In the meantime, fasten your seatbelts. We're going to go tackle Rhino's Road Trip three-part series right here in Salem, in my own hometown. Okay, here we are hanging out in my carport. Yes, we're not going anywhere for this Rhino road trip. And in this episode, we're going to take a look at doing ribs. Now, as you can see here, I've already cut open the bag. This is a cryovac sealed bag of spare ribs. These things are huge. And spare ribs are probably the... well, when it comes to ribs, the most often asked about when I get emails to my website at banditbbq.com. People ask about spare ribs. How do you get them trimmed down to be St. Louis cut? How do you prep them for competition? Well, in competition, I typically use baby back ribs, but for this episode, we want to answer your questions, so we're going to tackle the spare ribs. Now, both of these slabs that we have here weigh in at 11.58 pounds from the store, so just under 5.5 pounds a piece, 5.25 pounds a piece. But by the time we trim them all down, they're going to be nice and cut St. Louis style, and we're going to slow smoke them. We're going to also dress them up with the rub that I use in competition. It's called mojorub.com, barbecue seasoning and seasoning blend. So we'll go through all the techniques from prepping them out to cooking them to possibly even eating them. Spare ribs, we'll do one rack at a time. In fact, one rack we're going to go ahead and trim out what they call St. Louis cut. Now that doesn't mean that you have to be from St. Louis in order to prepare them this way. That'd be kind of crazy. But what that does mean is we're going to trim out quite a bit of this rack of ribs. I mean, you can see here that that's just a monster right now. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on the very back, as if there's more than one back. And as you can see, I'm pulling away a lot of this fat that is just kind of sitting on top of the ribs. Now we will cook these with the bottom side or this side down, but we still want to clean it up and you know, get the most that we can out of it as far as good edible meat. A lot of the fat is going to render down just by simply slow smoking it the way that we're going to, but again, want to get it all cleaned up. Now, one indispensable tool that you need when you're prepping ribs or really any kind of food, but barbecue, since you're working with a lot of meat, is to have very sharp knives, which I have quite a few here. First off, this big flap that's on here, that has a lot of silver skin, as they say, or membrane on there that is just not edible. So we're going to first take our very sharp knife and just work our way down and get rid of that. That is really not edible. Although there is some meat on the back side, that's just not good eats. So you want to get that cut off. Now, as you can see with this particular rack of ribs, and we'll see it on the other one as well, this has a huge bone right here. Now, the rib bones themselves actually run this direction, but we're going to get rid of this big bone over here. We're going to trim this rack of ribs down. Right here you can see that looks like a blemish, but that's kind of a knuckle where different bones come together from here to here. We're going to trim this all out. Actually, let's go ahead and mark where we're going to trim those right through here. so that if you can see that line there, you'll see that we're going to have a nice even rack of ribs by the time we get through. Now before I cut that off completely, there is a membrane on the back of these ribs that's very, very tough. In fact, even after you cook it, it's just not going to break down enough where you can chew through it very easily. So you want to strip that off. Lots of people might use a spoon or a dull knife or pliers, what have you. One of the things that we've come across that we use are catfish skinners. Yep, catfish skinners. We've been using these for quite a few years. They tend to last forever, almost. But all you have to do is grab that membrane. You can see it just kind of peeling back here. And every rack of ribs that you work with are going to be a little bit different. Some racks you might grab hold of that membrane and the whole thing will pull off in one great big sheet. And other times you'll have to work at it and just get it in pieces. I don't know the science behind it, but I do know that using these catfish skinners, or I call them rib skinners now, does make it a whole lot easier. So, whoop, almost had the whole thing coming off there. Let's grab it again and just pull it away. There you go. It's just as easy as that. We did get a couple pieces just left on around that knuckle that's poking through, so we'll grab that and get that off. Now, getting through these bones, again, with a very sharp knife, and I scored it already, and this knife is actually sharp enough that we can just slice right through the bones as well to give us a nice, even rack of ribs. Turn it around, make it just a little easier to cut with, or to cut. We have one rogue bone here that's deciding he doesn't want to go anywhere. Doesn't want to be cut. That's okay, because my knife and I am tougher than that bone. There we go. More than one way to skin a cat, more than one way to slice up a rack of ribs. Now, let's get that out of the way. Here is your basic St. Louis cut rack of ribs. You can see these things are still huge. They're very long. In competition, I would go through here and even cut off a lot of this fat that's on top. I mean, it's okay to leave a little bit of that on there, but once we start seasoning this up in just a minute, any of the seasoning that we put on top of that fat is likely to just slide off when it comes time for cooking, because that fat's going to render down and we want the seasoning to stay on the ribs, not to disappear. Something that you want to take care of as well when you do start trimming your ribs is to watch out not to cut too close to the bone. If you get it cut too close to the bone, where you can see just a little bit of the bone coming through the meat, that's called a shiner. Kind of like getting poked in the eye or punched in the eye to get a shiner or a black eye. Well, that's what they call them on ribs, both spare ribs and baby back ribs. So we're just going to trim pretty close here to get the bulk of that fat off, and that looks pretty good for me. We're not cooking in competition here. We're using competition style techniques, but you can see on this back, the rib bones are becoming pretty prominent. You can see them there on the ends as well, and when these cook, they'll start pulling back from the ends. Now this big old hunk of meat, excuse me, that we cut off, we're not throwing that away. That's still good. We can cook those for, you've heard of rib tips. Well, that's what this is going to be, rib tips. Now, unlike the big slab of ribs, it's not going to have as much of a membrane on here. There is just a slight membrane here on part of it. And when you look closely at the ribs, I don't know if you can tell in the video or not, but when you look closely at the back of the ribs, you'll see kind of an opaque skin, if you were. That's that membrane, the film that's on the back of the ribs themselves, and that's what you want to peel off. If you're cooking baby back ribs, follow the same techniques, although with baby backs you won't have to trim off this big section. If you're doing beef ribs, you would follow the same technique that we're going to be following all the way through here as well. With beef ribs though, you want to be extra cautious or not cautious, but be extra aware that the membrane on the back of those beef ribs, a whole lot tougher to eat and a whole lot tougher to get off the ribs before cooking them. But you definitely want to take that membrane off beforehand. So that's basically how to skin it. Let's get to prepping it now. We're going to set that aside for now and prep out just this one rack because it's ready to go. Both in competition and at home, I like to kind of layer the flavors. I want to build a flavor profile here. This is the back of the ribs, and as you can see, I'm just going to put some regular yellow mustard on there. It really doesn't matter what brand you use or what kind you use. Just get plain old regular yellow mustard and just rub it in. Now this is going to act for more than one aspect of the ribs, or this is going to act as both a layer to keep our dry rub on, but with the vinegar that you'll find inside the mustard, it's also going to start to break down the meat just a little bit as well. I want to put a little extra on here and go ahead and get the sides of the ribs. You know, and I've had people tell me, well, why are you even messing with the sides of it? Say, well, only season the part of the meat that you're going to eat. And in this case, there's meat on the sides. So, as you can see, nice layer of yellow mustard on there. Now, this is our Mojo rub. This is the rub that we use in competition. And if you want to find out more about Mojo Rub, you can visit the website at mojorub.com. That's MOJORUB.com. So, mustard's down. That's going to help all this rub to stick to it. I tend to put a little more rub on the back than I do on the front. Why? Well, because as these cook, the back or the bone side is going to be down. And as the fat starts coming off and melting away while it cooks, it's likely to carry a little more of that rub with it into the bottom of the smoker. So I season the back of it a little more liberally. Now, even though it's called rub, I don't necessarily rub. If you want to pat it in, that's fine. But in rubbing it in, you have to be careful of the ingredients that's in there. This particular rub does have a kosher salt in it, which is a much coarser salt than your table salt. And I don't want it to necessarily, you know, tear into the ribs. Now, though I don't want to tear into the ribs, you can see the bones as you're up close and prepping them. I do want to, you know, allow some smoke as well as some of the seasoning to get down in between the rib bones. So I'm going to just pierce a few holes in between each of the rib bones. That's going to help that rub and all the smoke that we're going to be using to permeate the meat from the backside as well. Okay, so that's good right there. All right, flipping these bad boys over. Some of the mustard has already started carrying over, but not enough of it, so let's do it again. We'll rub down this side. And we apply the mojorub.com seasoning blend. Be sure and get the sides of it as well. Now, in this Mojo Rub, just like a lot of the other commercial rubs that you'll find out there on the market, it does have a pretty good amount of brown sugar in it. With ribs, sometimes you want to go just a little bit thinner on the rub application, depending on how you like your color on them. I like a nice reddish brown color. These particular ribs are going to be just a little darker because the brown sugar will start to caramelize in the cooking process.